Welcome to Words of Wisdom by Wiser. My name is Maryam Al Qubaisi, and I'm the Director of International Relations in the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure of the UAE. And I'm proud to host today Michael Liebreich, from the CEO of Liebreich Associates, with me in this podcast. I just noticed a lot of commonalities between us. We're both Cantabrigians.
Okay.
From the same department, engineering.
Engineering.
Yes.
So Trumpington Street.
Trumpington Street, indeed. But I was there in 2010. Oh, I wish I can say sooner, but yeah, that was many, many years ago.
Not as many years
I
as
Googled
1984 I graduated,
Yeah.
But that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
So we do have a lot in common. So I'm very excited to kickstart the podcast. Michael, you've been an inspiration to the Wiser community. I'm curious to learn more about what you follow on social media. Would you say you're an Instagrammer or a Twitter kind of person? What kind of social media do you follow? And do you have a specific influencer or a specific account that you specifically follow?
I am on Instagram, but I've completely failed to build any sort of followership. So I started posting photographs from the various places. You know, as I do what I do tend to travel around quite a bit, sadly using a lot of flights, but I travel a lot. And I was posting photographs there and nobody was interested. So, where I spend most of my time is LinkedIn, and now Blue Sky. I'm trying to actually wind down on Twitter or X.
Blue Sky is news to me. So what is this? Is it a new platform?
So Blue Sky I think it was founded by the same guy, Jack, whatever his name is, but it's spun out from Twitter. And a lot of the tools are frankly better than Twitter in terms of you can post a starter pack. So the accounts you like, you can put them together in a starter pack and help other people very quickly sort of get engaged in the community. So it's working really well. That's where the energy community has migrated.
You need a neutral platform, right? Michael, you want a platform that doesn't, I think we eventually need to start using AI to our advantage and develop algorithms that will attract more followers, more support rather than hate. So this is really interesting to know. I wasn't aware of that. Now, you've had an amazing career, Michael, and you've been, as I mentioned, an inspiration to the Wiser community and beyond. If you look back on your career and pick one moment that you learned the most from, what would it be and why?
Yeah, it's a great question, but it's a hard question because I think every day we should be learning, so it's very, it might be something that I learned today that changes my career because I certainly don't feel like I'm done. I was very lucky early on in my career to work on experience curves. I joined a small company. So I was at Cambridge. I then did a lot of skiing. And then I joined a small company called Liebreich Associates, which was a spin-off from BCG, the big consultancy BCG. And we did one of the main planks of our analysis was experience curves. And I did experience curves for things like the very early fiber optic cable. I did printed circuit boards. But I also did things like rock quarrying. And rock quarrying also has a learning curve. It's just that we're not doubling. It's not like microchips where you double the volume of microchips ever produced. You double every year or two, every 2 years. So that's Moore's law. In rock quarrying, it's much slower. But there is a generalization that as humans, as we do things, we learn and we also invest. We build infrastructure, which can make tasks easier over time. And that's been a sort of red thread in all of my analysis since. So when I started New Energy Finance, it was on the understanding that solar power goes the exact same way as, for instance, flat screen TVs. It becomes much cheaper pretty fast. And so I was very lucky to do that sort of modeling early in my career. And we're talking now 40 years ago. And it's been really the thread, pretty much throughout. As I try and look at even now hydrogen, the question is, which parts of the hydrogen value chain will get cheap? And crucially for hydrogen, which parts will not get cheap quickly because they are much more heavy engineering or chemical engineering related. So I was just very lucky with that. And some of the people that helped me, I have to say, I had enormous luck in the people that I came across, people who gave me opportunities, sparring partners that I met. Some of the important things are it's not always the things that help you in your career, not always the things that go well.
True.
Sometimes, I worked with a very, very difficult director around the same time. And, he had, analysts in tears. He was an obnoxious person, but that was the hand I got dealt. And I learned a lot of tricks and tools of how to protect myself and how to win arguments and how to maybe be a little bit political and so on. So sometimes the tough stuff is what gives you most.
Cannot agree more. If we look at your political career as well, I mean, you've testified to parliamentary committees in the EU, UK, even the UN General Assembly. What are some of the learnings and insights you've seen in how we can all collaborate and coordinate between the public and private sectors? Because from what you told me, you've gained experience to look or zoom out of a situation and assess everything throughout the value chain. Now, technical people tend to be focused, very narrow-minded, if you will, on certain issues. Now, how can you reconcile this between the private and public sectors? And if you can tell us, based on your experience, some examples.
Technologists spend 90% of their time solving the problem and 10% of the time writing it up and communicating. And my analyst teams at New Energy Finance, I used to say, in fact, and since Liebreich Associates, everything I do, 50-50. Spend 50% of the time solving and 50% of the time communicating, which feels very strange to engineers, to kind of left-brain technocratic type people. The answer, once you've got it, the answer should speak for itself, right? No, you have to spend half of your time, half of your energy is about communications. What am I doing when I go around and I do my speaking engagements? It's actually all communications. It's not problem solving. I mean, I feel actually at this point in my career, probably I have a pretty good handle on the energy transition, what works, what doesn't, what it's going to look like. Of course, I'm learning on that as well, but mainly what I'm doing is actually communicating. I'm picking, maybe it's a chart, maybe it's a fact, maybe it's a turn of phrase, and frankly, it might even be a joke. Maybe there's something funny, and I can use that with an audience, and it makes them think. Hang on a second, that was funny, but actually it's true as well. So I think a lot of us engineers and technocrats, whatever you call us, we need to spend much more time putting ourselves, first thing is, put yourself into the shoes of the audience, right? The audience who is maybe a politician, maybe it's an investment committee, maybe it's just somebody, who needs to buy a new boiler. Ask what are they thinking and what is the nature of their decision and what are the kind of acupuncture points in their decision? Because we want to talk about what we discovered, the model we built, the lab experiment we did, the product design team that we led. But maybe they don't care about any of that. They just want to know which boiler should I buy or which heating, or they want to know what clause should I put in this bill. If I come back to the experience of testifying to parliamentary committees, it's very, very important because you have important people, you have their attention. There's usually a team behind the scenes that's going to synthesize, write a report, and so on. But again, we need to engage much more broadly. Decisions are not made by that committee. The decision, if you get an example into a report, some analysis you did, or you get mentioned, your business gets mentioned in the report, that's the tip of the iceberg of how political decisions get made. The political decision gets made over long periods before the committee, after the committee, in the legislation, 5 years before when somebody met somebody by chance, and the idea was planted of maybe doing solar in that area or region, or maybe there's a new transmission interconnector that needs to get built. but those decisions build over time, and the 50% of our time that we need to spend communicating needs to include that outreach, that engagement with decision makers.
This is quite important because you're right. You inspire these decision makers at an early stage, and you condition them to think differently beyond what, their common understanding is. So you've been part of Wiser now for how long? Many years, I guess.
I think since it was formed.
How would you see the difference in terms of women engagement, women empowerment, and the role this plays? And why are we specifically focusing on women? Is there something strategic about this? Yes, I guess, but we don't just have women as decision makers. There are men as well. So if you can just shed some light on the experience.
It's been really interesting being involved, because I think Abu Dhabi has got more. It's one of the only countries in the world where more than 50% of STEM students are women. So something's working. And it's been great to be involved and to sort of see the change from, is this a real issue, to yes, and it's something that is productive. We can actually, we can make changes. It's not just paying lip service to it.
I guess this is a great opportunity to give a shout out to Her Excellency Hana Rastamani, who is the first female CEO of a bank specifically in the UAE, first Abu Dhabi bank. Also in the sector I come from as well. Prior to joining the federal government, aviation is also a sector where women are underrepresented. But we've seen quite a change in the past few years where women have become chiefs in their roles.
Let me just talk about what I did when I was with New Energy Finance, Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and we created the summit, the Bloomberg New Energy Finance Summit it is now. And back in 2008, I said we need to have 30% women thought leaders on all of the panels, all of the events at the summit. And at the time, we were at something like 15%. And by the way, at the time, IHS CERA Week was at 7%. And I said 30%, and my team said it can't be done. There are not these women. They do not exist. You can't put people on a panel who don't exist. And I said, I don't believe that. And I don't care if we have to take more junior women and put them on panels with more senior men, because I guarantee you they'll be smarter, more articulate, more driven. And that's exactly what we saw. And within 3 years, we got to 30%. And and I didn't like the idea. It's not a quota, because we didn't change the requirements in terms of having the most brilliant people possible on the panels. We just made sure that we went out and looked for and found the right women to put on the panels. Now the question is, when will you have, if you list the top 100 organizations in Abu Dhabi, when will you reach 30% women CEOs of that list of companies? That's your challenge.
It is indeed. But I also want to sort of counter-argue this. Do we envision leadership to be simply manifested in a role of a CEO? I feel that female leadership is not limited to the role of the CEO, because I think this, idea of a CEO historically has been shaped by men, and therefore certain characteristics are attributed to the role of a CEO. And therefore, we feel that, as women, we don't have, some of these characteristics. Hence, we are not fit for the role. So also our perception of what requires or the characteristics of a chief needs to be revised internationally, not just in the UAE. But I also question whether a worthy female leader needs to be a CEO.
Okay, so I'm going to push back here because, let me say, first of all, you're absolutely right to call out that it's not just about the CEO. Every CEO is leading a team, and you could call it the C-suite. So list out the C-suite. But what I would say, the risk of saying, well, it's not about the CEO, it's about the C-suite, is that then companies can take the easy route. So you have the woman who's the head of HR, the woman who's head of marketing, maybe the woman who's head of, compliance or sustainability. But the big roles where money is changing hands, which is around operations, finance, CEO, then it's more comfortable. It feels more sort of, less risky to have men do those roles. We need to push back on any thinking that says that the role is not appropriate for women or women are not appropriate for the role. Maybe the role needs to change, fine. But I don't think we should compromise. I just don't think we should compromise.
There was an IATA target, 20% by 2025, I think, to increase the number of female in C-suite roles by 20% by 2025. And that was in aviation only. So, again, it is a global ambition to increase female leadership in industry and in the corporate world. So it's interesting to see that this is also backed by men.
And I think it's perfectly appropriate to take a long-term view. I'm not saying that tomorrow, and I'm not saying there should be any purges or anything, but the vision has to be, I think, full integration and full, because otherwise, essentially, it's undervaluing the contribution of 50% of the population to say that there are certain roles that they can't inhabit. So the long-term view, and of course, what happens is once you have, if the interim is lots of women in marketing and sustainability and so on, that's fine because they will also move around and become CEOs or they'll become entrepreneurs. That's the other thing that's very important. We found real difficulty in every time I've been involved around entrepreneurs, venture-funded companies, the Bloomberg NEF pioneers, the World Economic Forum pioneers. It's women are underrepresented in venture capital and startups, and that's the toughest thing to change. That's another thing that Wiser, I know, has been working on.
It's wonderful. So you do recommend that the Wiser community expands not just in a specific region beyond. They've always been working internationally, but I guess in that case, widen the net, perhaps even target more industries that may not be limited to energy and renewable energy specifically.
I think absolutely. I think that one should always in life, you go after the tough challenges. So, there are certainly, women underrepresented in lots of parts of the world and in lots of sectors and industries. And also in lots of functions. As I say, if you look at, heads, COOs, operations, COOs, CEOs, CFOs, women are underrepresented versus marketing and human relations and so on. So, HR. So, absolutely go after the tough challenges. And I think you're reaching the point here where you've got enough success stories under your belt to be able to go to countries. There's the same issues in Japan. There's the same issues in lots of Latin American countries that are actually very progressive, and yet women are underrepresented. And by the way, Europe is not. It's not like we have completely solved this in Europe or even the US. So, yeah, there's a lot more work to be done. It is a core agenda. And let me say also, I think it can also spread to other types of diversity. Of course, gender is it's a vital, important starting point. But there are other forms of diversity, things like neurodiversity, or people with disabilities, maybe mobility disabilities, but the absolute ability to play a full role in business. So maybe take some of the lessons from Wiser and take them to other forms of diversity. I think there's a huge, important role to be played there.
Agree. And lastly, I guess, again, we go back to your, amazing career. What would you give your younger self? What advice would you give to your younger self? But I'll also add female members in your family, very young, aspiring in the prime of their careers. What advice would you impart to them?
I'm always struck by the question of, what advice would you give to your younger self? Because there's inherent in the question is an assumption that you have regrets. Because had I had this advice, maybe I would have been more successful. Maybe I would have done things differently. And I don't have regrets because you have to work with the information you have. That younger self, when I look at it, if I say, well, I stayed too long at certain roles. I stayed too long at McKinsey. I stayed too long probably at the Associated Press was a job that I did. I was, however, very brave in leaving jobs or roles that I really knew were wrong for me. And I left them without necessarily knowing what I would go off and do next. So I don't, other than telling, I think I would, I don't think I can say it to myself, but I would say it to perhaps some of the listeners. If something is wrong for you, stop doing it. Don't wait for the next thing to come along, because when you have a job, when you have a role and you want to change that role, it's very tempting to sort of hang on to security, look for something, but you only find one thing at a time. Whereas if you leave, if you just say, do you know what, I'm going to take a sabbatical, I'm going to take the risk, then you can examine multiple routes, multiple opportunities. You can network. There's nothing embarrassing about that. That used to be a big career problem. Oh my goodness, you've got a 6-month gap. How do you explain that? What happened? What terrible catastrophe? Now, do you know what? People are taking gap years. They're taking sabbaticals, and it's perfectly okay to explain that. You can explain it in an interview, and that gives the opportunity to really assess every so often. The world is changing also very, very fast. So, maybe you need to take 6 months and do a course or an online course on AI. I wish I could do that, and maybe I should be doing that even now at this point in my career, because it's changing so fast. So, I guess I would say be brave. I'm not sure I could have been braver, because I was pretty, out there. But do be brave and make those changes. If it comes to the younger members of my family, what advice I'm giving, or how I have 2 daughters. I've got one son, 2 daughters. I think we've always had very strong women in my family, which has been perhaps kind of partly why I'm so committed to this agenda. My daughters will not be pushed around. That's what I've tried to give them. Never accept anything second grade. No option is off the table just because you're a woman. And I think once a young woman, once a girl has got that, they're kind of halfway there. Never be pushed around. And above all, never put up with bad behavior, because it's, I can't call out this, particularly if there's harassment of any sort. Zero tolerance that I've tried to make sure my daughters understood there will be 100% support for them if they push back against any nonsense. 100% support.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael.